Hey guys, welcome to a new weekly vlog. So today is the Madeline Miller signing and I'm so excited about it. I have no idea what I'm even gonna say to her, but I'm just so excited to meet her and just like hear her talk about literally anything. It's gonna be such a good time. And then we're also going to take another day trip to San Francisco just like we did in the last vlog. If you haven't checked that out, I'll link it up above. We're gonna get going to the signing and it's gonna be really fun, as I already said. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I can't believe I'm meeting Madeline Miller. Okay, bye.
Famously a story about a man. The first word of the Odyssey in Greek is andra, man. Sing me a man, muse. So what inspired you to take this story of a man and turn it around and tell the story and some more stories besides from the perspective of a woman and a goddess?
Sure, and first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for coming and doing this. I was so excited when I heard that Don Zuckerberg was going to be the one interviewing me, and thank you to Kepler's also for having me. And thank you all for coming. I feel like Friday the 13th is a great day to talk about wishes. We're all here. So what really started off this, the sort of seed of Circe, actually was started when I was 13 years old. In my English class, we read the Odyssey that year. And I had loved Greek myth before that, and I sort of knew that there was this character named Circe floating around, this witch who turned men into pigs, and I was really excited about that because there are so few female characters like Circe in mythology. Usually women who have the type of power she has also have to be kind of punished for it by the end of her story, but she manages to avoid that. And so in the episode with Odysseus lands on her island. He sends some of his men to go explore. They meet Circe, she welcomes them in, she gives them to draw the wine, she turns them into pigs, and then Odysseus has to go confront her. And on the way, he's stopped by Hermes, the great trickster god and the god of travelers, who gives him some magical herbs that will make him immune to Circe's spells. So this is a great setup. And I was really excited because I thought, this is gonna be a really great scene. He's smart and complicated, she's smart and complicated, there's gonna be like banter and a battle of wits. What actually happens in the scene, if you know the Odyssey, is that she tries to turn into a pig, it doesn't work. And he pulls his sword on her and threatens her. And she screams and falls to her knees and begs for mercy and invites him into her bed in like one breath. And I was really mad, actually. And I just felt so frustrated. I understood that this was the hero's story, she was an obstacle, he had to overcome her, but it felt like such a missed opportunity. Can't we just stay with this female character a little bit longer? Do we have to literally put her on her knees in front of the hero? The phallic sword did not escape my notice. And so I just felt like, why does this have to be always his story? Can't we focus on her story? Now, as I continued to study classics, I had a slightly more sophisticated view of that scene. And I think what continued to strike me is actually how Circe has been very badly treated. I think by kind of later literary versions, she's often just treated as a straight up villain. And she's sort of the man-hater, the spider at the center of the web. She, is kind of the incarnation of male anxiety about female power. If women have power, men are getting turned into pigs. And, part of what I was interested in, though, is that actually, once you kind of get past that moment where he tames her, you start to see that she is incredibly helpful to him. She hosts him on her island. And although Odysseus spends the entire Odyssey agitating to get home, her island is the only place that he's not eager to leave. His men have to come and remind him. And so I felt like there's this untold story about sort of the fact that Yes, she's frightening and she can turn men into pigs, but also she is benevolent and incredibly helpful to Odysseus. So I sort of wanted to bring back that complexity as well as give her a voice.
And you really drew out that connection between, or the contrast between her and Calypso, right? When she's talking with the manipulator.
Yes. So Calypso, and I feel like Calypso and Circe often get confused, which is understandable because they are both nymphs on islands who Odysseus sleeps with in the Odyssey. So whose names begin with C. But Calypso is the one who keeps Odysseus prisoner against his will for 7 years. Whereas when he goes to Circe and he says, I'm ready to go, she sort of starts giving him all this good advice. She says, well, the first thing you have to do is you have to summon this dead prophet out of the underworld. So here's the dimensions of the pit, here's some sacrificial animals. And she just starts, giving him this incredibly specific, witchy, kind of necromancy knowledge that really he probably couldn't get anywhere else.
And so you said she turned the men into pigs, which, I mean, obviously, to some extent she did. But one of the things that I thought was interesting that you really drew out in Circe is that the men are already pigs.
Yeah.
Right? but specifically, the men, they act like pigs, right? She observes men acting like pigs, and she seems to sort of see people for who they really are and to want to bring that out in them. Is that your vision of witchcraft, or is that something specific to how you do Circe, or is that Ovid? That was my that was my.
Well, I definitely wanted Circe to be, she is a goddess of transformation, and so I wanted her to be working with transformation, not only transforming others around her, but herself by the end of the novel. But the pigs thing was very interesting, and it's something I thought a lot about because, as you know, pigs are it's not just sort of so simple in the ancient Greco-Roman world that pigs equal bad. That is coming a little bit more out of sort of Christianity and Judaism and sort of the idea of pigs as unclean. But pigs in the ancient world could also be sacrificial animals. They were sometimes particularly associated with goddesses. So I wanted that transformation to be, it's almost like they're even worse than pigs. That I sort of wanted it to be a little bit more mysterious and to have this sort of sense that, but also it's clearly a punishment. She is taking away their ability to be people, but it's not as simple as sort of, I wanted it to be slightly more witchy than just pigs are bad, men are pigs.
Tempting though that may be. So, does she eat them? I feel like that was not really clear in the Odyssey. And is the end game to eat the pig?
So, this is one of the things that, as you know, scholars debate in the Odyssey, which is that the sort of Circe episode starts. Odysseus lands on Circe's island at a very low moment for him and his crew. He leaves Troy with all 12 of the ships that he came to Troy with. All his men survived those 10 long years of besieging the city of Troy. And then between leaving Troy and getting to Circe's island, in those 2 years, he loses 11 of his 12 ships. And he loses them in the most horrifying ways possible. He loses them to, cannibals. He loses them to the Cyclops, tearing them to pieces and eating them. So it's just kind of horror after horror. And then he lands on Circe's island. One of the first things he does is he kills this gigantic stag. And people have talked a lot about is that, and the stag sort of has like these big weepy eyes. And the question is like, is that a person that he just killed or not? And people have, debated it. In my version, I would say no, but I think you could definitely go that way. And Virgil, sort of the great Roman epic poet, actually has this wonderful riff on Circe's island. So Aeneas, who is the hero of the Aeneid, kind of the Roman version of the Iliad and the Odyssey, as he is going to Italy, he passes by the island of Circe. He sort of goes through a lot of the same things that Odysseus does. And it's this amazing scene because Virgil writes it like it's a horror movie. They're just going by the island. You hear the screams of men who are now animals, and you just hear like a little singing of Circe, like creepily singing. And it's like don't go on that island. And so I feel like you could definitely go that direction. That this is this cannibalistic horror movie island.
So speaking of Virgil and of these sort of scholarly debates, I mean, you're a classicist by training. So how much did you draw on both ancient sources and on modern scholarship when writing this book?
I always like to use scholarship, actually. That is going to sound really nerdy, but I find it very inspiring. That when I get stuck, I'll sort of go to secondary, sources and read scholars arguing about the section, and sort of usually that will shake something loose or spark something in me. One of the things, but I also really wanted to push back against some of the primary sources. So one of those key moments that I mentioned is that Circe kneels to Odysseus. If you read the novel, you'll notice she does not kneel in my version. And I also sort of reconfigured a version of her story in Ovid, the love triangle between Circe and Glaucus, a god who used to be immortal, and a nymph whose name I won't say, because it is a spoiler, but she is also like 3,000 years old, so I don't know. So there's a love triangle, and Ovid makes Circe's sort of motivation for doing something horrible to that nymph very thin, and sort of very shallow, and very sexist, to be honest. And so I wanted to give her much more motivation. So I wanted to be kind of transforming the sources, which I honestly feel like, particularly in the case of Circe, Homer is really inviting, because the Circe episode is narrated by Odysseus himself. It's him telling the story. And Odysseus is the great liar of ancient literature. Why are we believing anything he has to say? And you can see that when you realize, oh, this is Odysseus telling this story, you start to realize just how incredibly self-serving the story is. It's like, oh, I went to this island, there's this terrifying witch, but I tamed her, and then she threw herself at me, and she was super hot. And that's sort of like the emphasis over and over and over again. And every time he says, oh, Circe is so beautiful, what he's really saying is, look how great I am.
I wanted to ask you about the Prometheus episode. So what inspired you to, I mean, as far as I can tell, it was a creation, right?
Yes.
That doesn't exist in the literature. So what inspired you to create this incredibly formative moment where she meets Prometheus as he's being punished for giving him his fire?
Sure, and this does happen very early on in the novel, so it's not
very mild. Yeah.
So one of the things that I wanted to do is I knew that I wanted Circe's story to touch a number of other myths, but I never wanted to be like shoehorning those in. I didn't sort of want it to be like the Forrest Gump of ancient literature, like, and then she meets Pegasus, and then she meets Hercules. I wanted it all to kind of fit with her story. And that really worked for Circe because her story very naturally kind of touches these other stories. So I was looking for opportunities. For instance, her sister really is, in mythology, the mother of the Minotaur. So, this gave me the opportunity for a Minotaur C-section scene, which as an author, you are obligated to take that opportunity. So I was sort of looking for moments like that. And with Prometheus, Circe's father, Helios, and her grandfather, Oceanus, as two major titans, are very involved in Prometheus' story in the ancient mythology. And so it made sense for me. I felt like there was a path there because her father and grandfather were already involved in it. So I could sort of bring her in. And one of the things that I was really interested in Circe was her empathy. And I sort of got her empathy from two hints in the ancient sources. One is from a hint in Homer. Homer describes her as the dread goddess who speaks like a human. And that was very interesting. And that word is also debated. The word in Greek is audiasa, speaking like a human. And that was very interesting to me. What does that mean? And my novelist brain is already thinking, well, someone who's born a god but who speaks like a human, they would really be an outcast among the gods. And in ancient literature, usually when gods come down and speak to you, it's like your hair stands on end. It's this incredibly creepy experience, and if Zeus talks to you in his full glory, he incinerates you. So it's sort of, so what would it mean if you just had a normal voice? And how would you be, you'd be kind of an outcast, you wouldn't really belong. And then there's this other sort of reference in the Ovid section that I mentioned that talks about, Ovid describes her as having an ingenium, a temperament more fitted for love. And he means romantic love. And he sort of always has Circe falling in love with the wrong guy, and he's just not that into her. But then, and so this is the type of thing I could never write an academic paper on. But as a novelist, those two things were the same to me. I took that love to be something like empathy, And that to me spoke to her speaking like a human. And so now I'm thinking, okay, there's this goddess who is born with this ability to feel love, like most other gods can't. And if you know the other, ancient myths, you know that the gods are pretty terrible most of the time. They're selfish, they are, punishing, they're capricious, they only pursue what they want. Today we would call them sociopathic narcissists. And so Circe, that's Circe's family. That's what she's born into. And she sort of has to kind of come out of that. But I think that one of the things that I love about these ancient myths is how human the core stories often are. And so, the Odyssey at its core is the story of a man who's an exhausted war veteran who's trying to get home to his family. And then it's much harder once he gets home to re-enter his whole life than he thought it was going to be. And I feel like that's a story that we can tell at pretty much any time in human history. So with Circe, I was really interested in what is it like to be born into a family where you profoundly don't belong, and into a cruel family and an abusive family. And how do you get out? How do you even recognize what that alienation is, and how do you get out of it? And what's the cost of getting out? And so that Prometheus section, Prometheus is one of the very few gods in sort of ancient mythology that shows that kind of empathy. He's the god who brings fire to mankind, and mankind is suffering and shivering, and sometimes in some versions he also brings civilization to mankind. And for that, he is punished brutally by Zeus. He's chained up to the mountains, and an eagle comes every day and eats out his liver while he's alive, and then his liver regrows, and the eagle comes back the next day. I mean, it's just like really gothic. But I loved that in sort of getting to meet him, she was able to finally meet another god who sort of understands where she's coming from, and that's this awakening for her, that this feeling of discomfort that she's had her whole life actually means something.
That was something that really struck me about your Circe, was that there were times where she felt very sort of divine, and like she was thinking on a scale where the human characters around her were not, especially when she becomes a mother. The early infancy of the son is so nerve-wracking for Circe in your telling of the book, that and I mean, I have children, and her terror all the time, and the way he takes up her every moment really spoke to me. The way that sort of, she has this whole, I mean, it's almost a career, really, right? It would be a witchcraft for the way that you make it to be work, labor, really rewarding work, but something that she labors at, and then she puts that all aside because she can't even think about it because she has the son. So what was that balance for you of wanting to make her somebody who was so easy to relate to, and also somebody who, I mean, part of the problem with the gods and why they seem sociopathic is because they just operate on a moral scale that doesn't make sense to humans.
Yeah. Well, I wanted Circe to be kind of caught. I wanted there to be that tension there, that sometimes she gets pulled more towards sort of humanity, and then she gets but she does still have a little bit of that divinity, that sort of divine perspective on the world, where she has lived for centuries or millennia, and it just shapes the way she feels. So I kind of wanted that to be a tension right along the whole way. And I feel like that when she has her son, this is where the rubber really meets the road, because for the first time, she has to care for a mortal. And she is suddenly so aware of how incredibly fragile this little child is. And I feel like that's the sort of thing that a lot of parents have that experience the first time. The hospital's like, yeah, you take that home now. It's like, you're giving this to me?
Nobody's going to tell me what to do
Right.
tomorrow.
And so I'm very grateful that my two daughters are not demigods. But it was very viscerally with me, that sort of, those memories of that fear, and also the intensity of the experience, the sort of walking with, I think any caregiver has had that experience of walking with the child at 3 a.m. who will not stop crying, and you have no idea why. And I think it's a very interesting thing coming out of that kind of narcissistic divine perspective to then devote yourself entirely to this child while still allowing the child to be their own person. I think think it's this very challenging thing. And she in the mythology, she has, you know, this son, and so her motherhood is a part of her story. And I really wanted to give it its due, because one of the things that I find I love ancient epic, but ancient epic is largely concerned with the world of men, the traditional world of men. So it's concerned with, you know, war and patrimony and vengeance and sort of fathers and sons. And there are some mothers. Achilles' mother is a significant role, but it's just not really sort of the world of women is mostly considered not important enough for epic. And I feel like, you know, one of the most epic things out there, if you've been through it or you've supported someone through it, is birth. So I really wanted there to be birth scenes, and I wanted to give that sort of like life or death, high stakes parenting its due.
Speaking of sort of the silencing of women in epic, so there's the scene early in the Odyssey where Penelope is out in the house, and Telemachus tells her to go back to her rooms where she belongs, because the space of women belong in the private space. And Mary Beard called that sort of she said that sort of Western literature begins with the silencing of a woman.
Yeah.
So you rewrote that scene a little bit, or you didn't rewrite it, but you really reimagined what it meant as a moment between a mother and son in a way that I found really inviting. So what does it mean to you?
Sure. So yeah, I love how Mary Beard, if you haven't read Women in Power and you're interested in women in the ancient world, definitely read it. But she talks about how it's sort of the first example of, you know, telling a woman to sit down and shut up, basically. And I was very interested in the character of Telemachus because I have always felt from sort of a psychological perspective, and Telemachus, by the way, is Odysseus' son with Penelope. Penelope is his wife that I would say Homer presents as even more brilliant than Odysseus himself. And I have always thought that it would be very difficult to be Telemachus. And you talked a little bit before about sort of my influences, and one of my influences on the character of Telemachus actually came from a Tennyson poem, the Tennyson poem Ulysses, which is sort of this poem. Ulysses is the Roman name for Odysseus. And in this poem, Odysseus is talking, and he has gone home to Ithaca and, you know, defeated the suitors and is king again, and he's gotten really bored. And he wants to go back out and have another adventure. And it's this very inspiring poem about sort of the, you know, human curiosity and the human desire to keep looking and keep striving. It has a number of extremely quotable lines. This is one that has "drink life to the lees, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." But as I sort of kept reading this poem, I realized that he doesn't even refer to Penelope by name. He calls her his aged wife. She waited for him for 20 years. And he talks about his son Telemachus by saying, you know, well, Telemachus is boring and Ithaca's boring, so I'll just leave him here and he'll take care of everything and I'll go do something exciting. And I guess I just kept feeling like, wow, that would be such a hard person to live with, that person. And so I was really thinking about Telemachus as what would it be like to have a father like that? But also, one of the things, speaking of sort of women's place in the epic story, is that in the Odyssey, the obsession is always with Telemachus and his father. Is he going to be able to take his father's place? Is he going to be able to be a man? And he's sort of at this cusp. He's kind of 21-ish, right around there, and he's kind of trying to stand up and take his role in the household. And everyone keeps talking about how much he looks like his father, he's like his father. But what I kept thinking is his father's been away for his entire life. For 20 years of his life. So if he's going to be like anyone, he's going to be like the mother who raised him. And so I was really focused on the Penelope-Telemachus relationship and how, so I was sort of interested in the idea that these are two very clever people and they would probably have a very close relationship in many ways, but then Telemachus would be sort of taught that they couldn't really have a close relationship, and so it would be very fraught. And so I enjoyed thinking about that and sort of focusing on the two of them.
It feels like this is actually a very exciting moment for women encroaching into Homeric space. So, Emily Wilson's Odyssey translation? Yes?
Yes,
All right.
I'll read it. It's
yes.
amazing.
Pat Barker's Silence of the Girls?
Yes.
And Emily Hauser's For the Most Beautiful. So I guess I was curious what your perspective was on how women are reshaping this Homeric landscape, and how you see your place in that.
And Donna Zuckerberg also. I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled. I feel like it's really important, and long overdue. But it's also something that's we also have Margaret Atwood and the Penelope ad that was sort of came a few years ago. But I think it's really important, and I think I love how, for example, in Emily Wilson's translation, she is sort of forcing us to see a lot of things in a different way, not just the role of women, but also, for example, she's reminding us that this is a slave society. And for the most part, we're talking about aristocrats. And the part where Odysseus offhandedly orders the murder of 12 maids, the word in Greek is slave, because they have slept with the suitors who they have no ability to give or deny consent there, so that's rape. So he has them murdered for being raped. That's really a hard thing to swallow, but it's in the text. And I would argue that we do a disservice to the text if we choose to not look, if we choose to look away from that. And so I really appreciate that she and other authors are sort of bringing awareness to stuff like that. I think it's brilliant. She calls the chapter with the Cyclops the shepherd and the pirate. That's Odysseus the pirate and the Cyclops the shepherd. And how sort of Odysseus is encroaching actually on the Cyclops. He's the one in the Cyclops' cave sort of invading his space. So I feel like it's wonderful because it's bringing a lot of attention to these stories that are all there, sort of simmering in the background, but get ignored.
And really bringing out the sexual violence aspects too,
yes.
Right? There's a degree of sexual violence in your book. So how did you approach that? What made you want to bring it in and use it the way you did, without being too specific? Because
yes, so I was very aware of the old trope that gets used in kind of like an SVU, special victims way, of where a woman being raped or sexually assaulted is sort of used as like plot fodder or used in a very sort of titillating, grotesque way. And so I didn't want that at all. I didn't want to bring it in as in sort of a casual way. But I also realized and very aware of the fact that rape is all over ancient literature, and sexual assault is all over ancient literature, particularly among nymphs, which is what Circe is. They are sort of the pawns and the prey of the ancient world. And there are a number of times you probably had this experience too, where you're sort of sitting in a classroom. When I was an undergrad or a graduate student, I was often the only woman, and everyone's discussing an episode of Ovid that's kind of like a lightly comedic take on rape from Ovid, and everyone in the class was discussing the meter. And I'm sitting there like, are we going to talk about what the scene is about? At what point, and so I felt like to not, here is Circe living on the island alone, and a woman alone in the ancient world would basically have been seen as a target. And so to not include that as part of her story actually felt like, whitewashing it. So I knew that was sort of going to be a piece of her story, and this also actually connected to one of the main things that drew me to her story in Homer, which is, why is Circe turning men into pigs? Odysseus, the most curious man in ancient literature, doesn't ask her. And we never find out why. And sort of in later literature, it's kind of treated, I talked about how she's treated as a villain. It's often treated like, well, that's what women do. They're evil. It's sort of this very kind of like, well, who knows? She's capricious. Who knows why she's turning men into pigs? But that's a really uninteresting answer. And it's a really sexist answer. And so I wanted to understand, that's a pretty extreme thing to do. So what would make someone do that? What could lead to that type of behavior? So that was something I wanted to think about too, is sort of the psychology leading into that.
So I have to ask you about the HBO show. Everybody knows Cersei's getting an HBO.
No.
Yes! Woo!
That's incredibly exciting. Are you involved at all?
So I, as the writer, I have basically no say. But yeah, so it's going to be hopefully a show for HBO Max, which is the new streaming series. I'm hearing 2021 for when it will come out. I have, as I said, very, very little control over any of it, but I felt really, really good about the people that I gave it to. I felt like they really understood the book.
And you're working on a new book.
I am.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I have two projects that I'm working on right now, and I'm not sure which one's going to come first. So I mentioned that I'm a theater director. Specifically, I work with Shakespeare on many of these same issues, actually bringing out voices that have been kind of silenced or in the background. And I've been thinking about The Tempest for a really, really long time. Oh, hooray! We got the
So you really like witches?
Yeah, I do. I know. It's witches and islands and magic. So The Tempest is there, and then the other is the Aeneid, and the Aeneid is the other great ancient love of my life. So at some point, I would like to write in the Aeneid's world.
That is so fascinating because normally people are Homer people or Virgil people. Very few classicists will admit to loving both.
I love it.
Hi guys, sorry for the music, but I ended up crying and I'm still kind of crying. And I just met Madeline Miller and it's so awesome. And I love her so much and she's so sweet. Hi guys, so I am back home from my little trip to San Francisco and the Madeline Miller signing, and I just wanted to talk to you guys about it. Remember when I said that I wasn't gonna cry? I'm meeting the icon herself. Will I cry? No. Will I cry inside? Yes. I totally fucking cried. As soon as I was watching her talk and like seeing her in person, I was like, the tears are coming and you about to put your clown makeup on and wash it all off with your tears, because she was the most inspiring and so incredibly smart and just so well spoken, unlike me in this very moment, just remembering her and the fact that I got to meet her. I loved her so much. It was just so good. The signing was literally like one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life. I am so happy I got to go and I got to meet her, and I'm just so grateful. When I went to go get my book signed, I was just telling her, like, as soon as I opened my mouth to speak, like, the tears started to come. She is doing an Aeneid retelling, which made me so excited because, if you don't know, Aeneas, who is one of the founders of Rome, is the son of Aphrodite. So I told her, I was like, so, you know, like, Aphrodite is kind of, you know, my patron goddess and everything, and I'm not saying that it would be awesome if she made an appearance in it, but it would be pretty freaking awesome if she made an appearance in it. And then, because I said that, when she signed my book, she put, "Hooray Aphrodite" in it. It's on my phone case, which you guys can't really see because I'm using my phone to film, but it has the birth of Venus on it, and she noticed when Sal was taking the picture of us, and it was the greatest experience ever. And then of course I got her to sign my Bloomsbury classics, because I'm gonna ship this to Carly and she's gonna give me hers so she can have a signed copy of Song of Achilles. She said, "I am made of memories." 'Cause The signing was like, the signing footage is like 30 minutes, plus I got some extra things, like extra scenery things. I'm just going to make this a weekend vlog, which I'm going to edit a little bit right now, so hopefully I can get it up today. And I also want to say that hearing her talk about Cersei definitely changed my perception of the book, so I'm excited to reread it, because my biggest gripe with Cersei is I just didn't personally like her interpretation of Cersei, just because I am one of those people who just loves a villain. I love a femme fatale. I love a traditionally evil female character, and I feel like she made Cersei very empathetic, but her reasoning behind really focusing on that empathy and all of that was just, it really resonated with me, and I think I need to reread it, because maybe I will give it a much higher rating, because I think I gave it a 3.75. I'm gonna go now. I hope you guys enjoyed this vlog, and if you didn't, you're a Madeline Miller hater and you need to unsubscribe right now. Okay, bye.